I think for people on just a political level to understand the Middle East conflict, it's almost impossible to do it without actually being in an area where you see just how close things are to one another. I mean, we walked out the Cotton Gate, which is in the Arab quarter, and you walk from there into the Jewish quarter back toward the Western Wall, and these things are cheek by jowl with one another. I mean, there is no separation. You're talking about areas. I mean, literally right behind us is Silwan on this area, and this is a largely Arab area, a largely Muslim area. And back here, up there, is a largely Jewish area, and they are right next to each other. I mean, they're in the same camera shot, and that has significant ramifications when people say, well, why don't they just figure out a way to live together in peace, or why don't they just find a way to separate from one another? Why don't you split Jerusalem?
People always say that. Why don't they just find a way to live together in peace? And the whole problem with that sentence is the just part. It's like, well, that's the simplest thing in the world, to live in peace. It's like, yeah, is there peace in your family? You think that's so simple? Is there peace in your heart? And then you're trying to get all, you can make a statement like that, and well, if people just, grew up, or if they just got their act together, they'd live in peace. It's like, I don't think there's anything more difficult to attain than peace.
For sure.
I mean, I don't even know if you can attain peace in your own heart in some sense, unless peace also reigns all around you. And so that might mean the peace that you have in your own heart can't even come about until peace is established everywhere.
Well, in Hebrew, the word for shalom, or for peace, is shalom, which also is the word for complete, right? Shalem means to be full or complete. And so the idea of peace requiring fullness, that it can't be divided, is, we tend to think of peace as it's the thing you make between opposites. It's the thing you make between warring factions. But you can't really
make... Right, and then you think about it as a compromise, and that's also not true.
Peace can't be made as a compromise. There has to at least be a fundamental agreement on the principle underlying it, or peace is just not going to last.
There has to be a unity and a higher principle. If you're trying to make peace with your wife, she wants something and you want something. The best way to make peace is for both of you to put your heads together and think about how you can both have more than you could have separately, together. And then you have peace, because people think, oh, that's a good deal. I have more than I needed and wanted as a consequence of that arrangement. And that's a peaceful negotiation. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So
especially in this region of the world, it's definitely a very rough thing to do. I mean, I think that the Abraham Accords are a great way of coming to some of those agreements. It's people recognizing that they have priorities other than sort of the religious conflict. We'll put that aside and we'll agree to the things that we can agree to and work on those things together.
Well, on the Temple Mount, you can see, in some sense, people of the three Abrahamic faiths are trying to fight out, and somewhat peacefully, thank God, somewhat peacefully, how that site can be holy across three different traditions.
It is important to recognize here that only happens under Israeli auspices. From 48 to 67, when Jordan ruled this area, it's completely banned to Jews. They wrecked synagogues and churches. It's an unfortunate reality that it's going to take reformers in,
Well, it seems like they're making progress on that front in the United Arab Emirates, right? They're building that tri-faith facility there, and there is some real attempt there, as far as I can tell. And this is part of the spirit of the Abraham Accords, to think that maybe there's enough commonality between the Abrahamic people to unite them, especially maybe in the face of all the threats to that entire Abrahamic tradition that are making themselves manifest in the world.
Well, that's the thing that I've been discussing with Muslim friends of mine, people who wildly disagree with me about things like Israel or Middle East peace. We've been talking about the fact that maybe the true threat to religious practice is not the people who practice the other Abrahamic faiths. Maybe the true threat is an ideology that seeks to
just dissolve the religious enterprise entirely.
Right, exactly.
And it doesn't even, because what it does is, the thing is that what happens when you dissolve a functional religious tradition, which would be one that was at least capable of uniting people over some span of time, just speaking in the least religious sense possible, you tear that apart. You replace it with some idiot ideology that can't propagate itself across time for even a couple of generations. You think, well, that's not true. It's like, yeah, this is one of the things that always bothered me about the new atheists. It's like, well, what about the fascists? What about the communists? I mean, those ideas sprang out of, I would say, something approximating a secular humanism. It's like, oh no, that had nothing to do with secular humanism.
Yeah, the French Revolution.
Like,
I mean, this has been...
Okay, fair enough, guys, but you had what you had was the demise of one religious system and the instant emergence of a religious system that was so unbelievably pathological that it made the previous pathological religion look like a complete paradise. You want to have, what do you want? You want the czars or you want Stalin? It's like, read your history and you'll figure out that real fast.
Exactly. And again, I think that goes back to the idea that if there is a higher ethic to be discovered, and if it is out there, if it's objective, and if that ethic has been revealed, and if it was revealed in Jerusalem, let's say, and that's what Jerusalem represents, then that higher ethic can't come out of us. I think that the lie of Marxism is that it was a discovery about the universe that was objectively true and therefore would instantiate itself over time naturally. And that, of course, was false. I mean, the predictions that Marx makes about economics and about what was going to happen in history were completely not true.
Well, and even when they were true, they weren't true for the reasons he thought they were true. Like the idea that capital accrues in the hands of a smaller and smaller number of people is sort of true in that a minority of people always tend to have the majority of the control over any given creative product. That seems like a natural law in some sense. You see that manifest itself in all sorts of domains that aren't merely economic. But he was wrong in that was the consequence of capitalism per se. He was wrong that other economic systems wouldn't produce the same end. He was wrong also in that there is a 1% that controls 90%, but the people who occupy that 1% churn a lot.
Right.
A lot.
And most clearly he was wrong about the immiseration of the workers. I mean, the idea that the workers would be immiserated and so there would be a worldwide revolution was clearly false. So the faith was falsified. So the answer was to change the nature of the claim of the faith, which was sort of Lenin's great discovery, is if I just sort of pretend that the historical projections never happened, or here's the reason why they didn't happen, and so they still might be fulfilled by a peasantry in Russia, which was precisely the opposite of what Marx claimed. He thought it was going to be a middle class or a lower class in Britain, an industrialized nation who had been immiserated by working the factories, and instead it turns out to be a bunch of serfs in Russia who are rebelling against the landlords.
Yeah, it also turned out that people weren't comparatively immiserated by the factories. In fact, they were comparatively elevated by the factories.
Right, exactly.
And so even though those factories, well, you could see what happened when the factories got established in China, is the Chinese decided pretty damn quickly that working on a farm or on a factory was a hell of a lot better than perishing while starving under Mao. So
the utopian creations of our own brains are significantly more dangerous, historically speaking, than a gradual evolution of a well-accepted system of ethics that result particularly in a series of commandments that can be enacted in daily life, and significantly less fulfilling also, because again, all of the modern theory that's based on sort of the Hobbesian notion that what man seeks is pleasure and seeks to avoid is pain, that's just not correct. I mean, it's not correct in any fundamental sense. It may be true on a moment-to-moment sense, but people routinely seek out pain in pursuit of a higher pleasure, right?
It's also predicated on the idea that what constitutes pleasure and what constitutes pain is momentarily self-evident, which it isn't. Because sometimes the most pleasurable things require a fair bit of pain to attain. And so, again, it's the problem of iteration. Is like, well, pleasure and pain computed over what time frame? Well, we're not going to address that. It's obvious. It's like, no, it's not. It's not obvious in the least. And so it's just specious. You see this with these arguments of that sort, that men pursue pleasure and avoid pain. It's like, you are acting as if what pleasure and pain constitute are self-evident, they're self-evident descriptions of the structure of underlying reality. You've crammed all of underlying reality into those two words then.
Right.
It's like, well, here's what motivates us, pleasure and pain. You divided the whole cosmos into those two things. And then you think, well, I'm just going to accept that axiomatic proposition. You know what pleasure is then, do you? It's like, well, that's not so simple. It's certainly not so simple psychologically. And when economists test out those predictions, say made on that narrow utilitarianism, which is bound in the moment, they find people don't act like that at all. And the behavioral economists have demolished the conceptual preconceptions of classical economics by playing relatively simple trading games and showing, well, no, people don't actually act like that at all if you actually look at how they act.
I think that what being in a place like this really reminds you of is again, the suppositions that we make in the West about how human activity and human motivation are just plain wrong in many cases. Because again, once
that's the flaw of rationalism,
right,
rather
exactly.
than the flaw of empiricism.
Yep. I mean, this is the sort of Michael Oakeshott or F.A. Hayek point, which is that you can rationalize your way into anything. And you believe, again, like you were saying, that what you're doing is for quote-unquote rational reasons. But the reality is that what you're doing because it was most likely handed down to you over an extraordinary period of time, and you were brought up in it to the point where you are acculturated to it. And to simply reject that heritage out of a fit of pique or in a search for individual identity, I mean, that's the real danger that I see right now, is that it used to be, at least you could make the case, and now I'm going to steel man Marxism for a second, but at least you could make the case that it was a search for a better world, that it was the search for a better form of humanity, communally speaking. We were all going to live better together because if we transform our community, then we'll transform the individual. It's wrong, but at least you make the case.
Well, you could make the case that before it was demonstrated to be wrong, it was at least arguably plausible.
Right. And now, because that failed, the replacement for that was not, okay, maybe we ought to think again about what it is that we lost. Maybe what we're actually thinking about is something more. Maybe what we're actually thinking about is should be just ourselves, free-floating individual souls that are wandering about in the chaos. And that's what we should be shooting for. Forget the community entirely. Forget transforming social conditions. None of that really matters. The only social condition that ought to be transformed is the one that hems me in on an individual level.
Well, that's kind of that's a degenerative liberal Protestantism, I would say, to some degree. So the only thing that's real is the ultimately atomized individual. And that's such a catastrophically self-defeating view. I mean, I see this practically too. I think part of the reason my lectures have been attractive to people is because I've been able to make the case that you're most likely to find the meaning that sustains you in life as a consequence of adopting responsibility in relationship to others. And then you can just explain to people how that works. Well, let's say you're really sick. Something's gone wrong in your life, and which is going to happen. Well, hedonism isn't going to save you then, that's for sure, because that's gone. And then, well, what are you going to rely on to get you through that? Well, let's say you're alone and isolated and you've never taken responsibility for anyone. It's like, oh, good. So now you're going to be sick and suffering alone. That's going to end well.